great pleasure for me to be on Children's Health Defence TV. I'm a great fan of the work this wonderful organisation is doing. My name is André Leu. I'm a long-term organic farmer, and I'm also the International Director of Regeneration International. And today I've been asked to talk about the attack on farming, family farming, particularly organic farming, and also to show that the future in agriculture is regenerative organic farming. So next slide, please. What I want to focus on to give examples of the attacks on organic agriculture are three countries that I know very well. I could give examples from every continent all over the world, but due to time restrictions, I'll concentrate on three. And this is Bhutan. It's a kingdom north of India and between China and India in the Himalayas. And next to it is a state of India called Sikkim. And below them is the country of Sri Lanka. And these are three countries I know very well. Bhutan, the Kingdom of Bhutan, announced a transition to becoming 100% organic at the Rio Plus 20 United Nations Conference in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil in June 2012. I was next to the Prime Minister of the country at that event when he announced it. This is part of the Prime Minister's speech, and what he stated there is that going organic is living, he puts the word G and H, and that stands for gross national happiness. Bhutan works on gross national happiness rather than gross national product or gross domestic product. Instead of looking at the amount of money that is spent, what they're more interested in is the outcome, that the well-being of all the citizens of Bhutan, and not just the citizens, but the wider environment, the whole environment, plants and animals of the country. And they call this gross national happiness. And they see that organic agriculture fits in very much with what they're trying to achieve, rather than industrial agriculture with all its pesticides and GMOs. And essentially, they don't want a toxic agriculture that poisons its food, poisons its people, and poisons the environment. So they see that organic agriculture fits in perfectly with gross national happiness. I put these slides in to show you that I was intimately involved with Bhutan becoming a 100% organic country. You see here, he's thanking myself and Dr. Vandana Shiva for the work that we have done towards Bhutan becoming 100% organic. The next slide, please. And here he acknowledges the fact that my visits to Bhutan and how I worked in training the ministry staff in organic agriculture, and also in building partnerships for Bhutan with organic market access projects. After this announcement at Rio, virtually days later, the pesticide or poison cartel representatives went straight to the Kingdom of Bhutan to undermine the 100% organic proposal. So I went to Bhutan several times to counter the cartel. And I was assured each time that because the edict to go organic came from the king, it would be a priority. The king is adored in Bhutan. He is highly revered. And if he says something, they do it. and this includes the elected governments. If he comes up with a policy, the governments will do their best. So the cartel then bankrolled national and international disinformation campaigns to undermine the government on several issues, economic issues, but also the policy to go 100% organic. Consequently, a year later, Jigme Thinley's government lost the 2013 election because of this negative media campaign by the poison cartel. I then returned to Bhutan to meet with the new government, and I was assured that because the edict to go organic came from the king, it would be a priority. And the new government continued with the previous government's organic plan. And this is, a screenshot I did just last week of their website, the official government website. They call it Organic Dream of Bhutan. And it's a beautiful picture there. This is the start of the Tibetan plateau. And you're looking down over the Himalaya ranges, down eventually towards India. And this is one of the first districts to become fully organic in Bhutan. I had the privilege of actually visiting there and working with the people. From there, it borders onto Tibet, and the only way to get into Tibet is through horses. And you see all the pack horses all loaded with goods. They walk 4 days from here into Tibet to trade. Neighboring Bhutan is Sikkim. Sikkim is a small state of India, and its chief minister, the chief minister of the state is the same in the US as the governor of a state. And the chief minister was called Pawan Chamley, and he started Sikkim's pathway to 100% organic in 2003. He won his fifth state election by a landslide in 2014. He was the longest serving chief minister, you could say the longest serving governor, state governor in India. And he was a very popular leader. And in January 2016, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, declared Sikkim as the country's first organic state. And I put this up because what happened after that was a concerted attack in the media. And I wanted to give this as an example because The Guardian is seen as a progressive newspaper. They call themselves fearless, independent, reader funded. But I want to show you on this attack, you've got Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They sponsored this article. In other words, they're the sponsor of this attack undermining Sikkim. So Sikkim's organic revolution at risk as local consumers fail to buy into the project. Now, I can tell you this is absolute disinformation. The local consumers were buying into it, but this was a campaign that they put a lot of money into. And this is just one example of all the media in the Indian media, the all through India, all around the world to undermine Sikkim and organic. Consequently, the most popular and longest serving governor lost the 2019 election. And the new government actually campaigned about overturning the organic status, and they tried to do it. However, there was such strong support from farmers, consumers, and within the ag ministry. And the ag ministry is very good here. They forced the government to continue with it. And the reason why is that organic agriculture increased the health, life expectancy, and income of farmers. They did not want to go back to the dark past. And this is last week. The government now is fully embracing organic agriculture. They see it as their future. They want to, because organic gets a premium and they get a high value, it's earning money. Sikkim was losing money in agriculture. They used to import fruits and vegetables and had a trade deficit. Now they've got a surplus and they want to bring that through to $1 billion now and expand it. So, like Bhutan, the pesticide industries, the poison cartels campaigns failed. This is the biggest campaign they've done. After they've lost in Bhutan and they've lost in Sikkim, they decided to spend most of last year, 2022, to put a full attack onto organic. This went over months and months and months, and they blamed the economic chaos in Sri Lanka on organic. They say, green dreams, how organic farming helped spark Sri Lanka's crisis. In Sri Lanka, organic farming went, catastrophically wrong. Sri Lanka's organic farming disaster explained. So let's explain it. Sri Lanka was in severe economic trouble due to financial debt. And this really started with infrastructure damage and social disruptions from a decades-long civil war. Then in April 2019, there was a church suicide bombings, and that destroyed their tourism industry. So tourists stopped going there, and that caused the value of their currency to fall, made everything more expensive because that they had to import all their essential goods, especially fuel, for gas. The government tried to stimulate the economy with tax cuts, but it had the opposite effect. It reduced government revenue and deepened the country's national debt. Then, of course, 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic comes, and that completely destroys the whole tourism industry. And it caused significant inflation and contributed to food shortages and essential goods and increasing food insecurity in Sri Lanka. That's 2020. By 2021, Sri Lanka was in serious trouble with a massive trade deficit. So what Sri Lanka did to try and reduce the trade deficit was to stop importing. And one of the ones they stopped the importation of were chemical fertilizers because they contributed to over $400 million in the trade deficit. And this was the first of a range of proposed measures to create an economic recovery. A few weeks later, the president gave a directive to form a presidential task force, and that was to create a green Sri Lanka with sustainable solutions for climate change. And part of the aim of the task force was to turn Sri Lanka into a world leader in the utilization of organic and natural fertilizer and the potential for sustainable development by minimizing climate changes and through a green economy. I've quoted this directly from the presidential directive. 2 days later, on May 12, CropLife Sri Lanka and CropLife International is the poison cartel. All the pesticide companies and agribusiness companies have joined together under CropLife and fund it to basically continue to make sure governments poison our food supply and stop them from banning any pesticides. So they put in a submission challenging the presidential directive. I've cut and pasted the beginning of the first page of that. I have that submission, so I know for a fact what they're trying to do and what they're trying to say. I just want to reiterate, the ban on importing chemical fertilizers was not to turn Sri Lanka into an organic country. It was to reduce the crippling national debt by $400 million. The presidential task force was formed to develop a green, climate change resilient economy, of which organic agriculture was one aspect. But Sri Lanka never developed and implemented a national organic transition program. So it's totally false to blame going organic for the economic troubles, as it never went organic. The reduction in fertilizer resulted in a decline in industrial agriculture's rice yields. And I want to say it's industrial agriculture. They weren't growing organic rice. They'd never transitioned. And I'll show you if they went to organic, they would have doubled yields with the correct organic methods. But this reduction in yields was not the cause of the riots. The rice millers have oligarchies. They join together, and every year they withhold rice stocks. So they withheld the rice stocks from the main harvest season, and they created massive shortages and exploitive prices. And this is what started the riots. The rice millers holding back food. So the campaign to blame Sri Lanka's economic chaos on organic agriculture is pure misinformation based on a series of lies that's fed by a PR company to poor quality journalists who did not fact check. The People's Revolt caused the collapse of the government, with the president and several ministers fleeing the country. But now the country is still embracing organic agriculture. This is really important to show that this disinformation campaign, like the others, have failed. This is a picture from last year showing how they are training farmers in organic agriculture in Sri Lanka, and this is being expanded. So it's very important to show that in all three countries, these campaigns failed and organic agriculture is expanding and growing. This part of the presentation is to talk about the future in farming. And I want to start with looking at the current farming system, which is we call industrial agriculture. And this is promoted as the only way we can feed the world. You know, there's the campaign to say if we go organic, we starve. So therefore, the only way to feed the world, nourish the world, is you have to poison our food with toxic pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and GMOs. So let's look at the facts. I have two graphs here side by side. One is from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and it's looking at the number of undernourished people, the people who don't get enough to eat. And if you can see from the 1960s to the mid-1990s, that number was decreasing. It's getting lower and lower. We're getting better at feeding the world. Then suddenly in the 1990s, it goes up rapidly. More and more people are hungry. We're feeding less and less people. The next graph is the increase in genetically modified crops. And it starts at exactly the same time. If you have a look at there, 1996, 1997. That's the same as the dip in the graph. And it keeps on increasing at a steady rate. So as the amount of acres under GM crops increases, so does the number of people who do not get enough to eat increase. And the reason for this is that the GMO crops aren't there to feed people. A lot of the farms, the farm animal feed to feed, and the other bulk goes into making ethanol to feed trucks and cars. None of the go feed the hungry. It's all about commodities. So food production away from the hungry and putting it into the commodity markets. That is why the number of people going hungry is increasing. I want to give a very good example of this, and this is called the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. And that's founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations and the Rockefeller Foundations. Remember, in the previous slides, I showed how Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sponsored the article that attacked Sikkim going organic. They launched this program in 2006 and they had the vision of doubling agricultural yields and the incomes of 30 million small-scale food producers in Africa. And they said they're going to halve both hunger and poverty in 20 African countries by 2020. Yeah, AGRA received $1 billion from Bill and Melinda Gates, also the US and UK government and German governments as well. They put $1 billion into this, and the money was spent to promote industrial agriculture to supply distant commodity markets, like I showed you with the increase in GMOs, and on getting them to grow GMOs, import synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. Next slide. So 2020, let's have a look at what they achieved. Instead of halving hunger, the situations in the 13 focus countries deteriorated. The number of people suffering from extreme hunger increased by 30% in the countries of intervention during the agri years. I've got a table below that's come from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization looking at the undernourished people in the world. Underneath, you see Africa. And in 2005, which is just a year before AGRA started, there was 195 million people who were undernourished. In the year that 2020, when AGRA finished, there's 281 million people who are undernourished. In other words, the number increased in those years by 86 million people. That shows that the industrial system is an absolute failure. It does not work. So let's look at what does work. And 500 million farmers around the world are smallholder farmers on 5 acres or less. And most of them are traditional farmers. They are what we call organic by default. And they actually produce 80% of the food in the global south. I think what is very important to talk about is these farmers grow food. Industrial agriculture tends to grow commodities, not so much food. Teaching these farmers to add good regenerative organic practices based on agroecology to their traditional methods, such as better soil nutrition, improved pest and disease control, better water use efficiency, better weed management, and how to use agroecology to increase biodiversity leads to significant increases in yields. To give an example of this, there's a report by 2 United Nations organizations, UNTAG and UNEP, and they looked at 114 projects, organic projects in Africa, covering 2 million hectares, that's 5 million acres, and 1.9 million farmers. That's a lot of farmers, just under 2 million. And the average crop yield, when they were taught good regenerative organic practices, was 116% in all the African projects. In East Africa, it was 128%. So what the report showed, that industrial agriculture caused which is the green revolution, that actually caused a decrease in food by 10% per person since the 1960s. So they said that the evidence shows that the way to nourish Africa is to have organic agriculture. And I want to give you an example of one of the projects. This, when I was president of IFOAM, this organization was one of our members, and they worked in Ethiopia. And this is the area where they had, that they had the Live Aid conference about, where thousands of people were dying from food insecurity. And what they did here is they worked with the local people to start rehabilitating the hillsides and the gullies. They got them to grow what we call fertilizer trees, such as sesbanias, which you put nitrogen into the soil. You can harvest them and feed livestock, and also you can eat the flowers and other parts as food for people with these trees. Also to grow legumes such as faba beans, which will increase the nitrogen fertility, but also people can eat them as a high protein bean. The rehabilitated hillsides can be sustainably harvested to make compost to put on the fields. So they put that on the fields. And this is the result. What the smallest bar on the left-hand side is what they call the check, which is the traditional system. And the green bar is where they put compost on. And you can see in every case there's more than 100% increase in yield. The next bar is actually where people put fertilizer on. This wasn't so much an organic trial. This was to allow people to use whichever system. So some people chose fertilizers, but in every case, the compost got more yield than the fertilizers. And this is an example of the trials, and they were growing wheat. And if you look at the deep green field, that's wheat grown on compost. And the wheat grown with chemical fertilizers needed spraying with a fungicide, because what happened is that they got rust that year. The wheat grown with the chemical fertilizers got badly attacked by the rust. The wheat grown with the compost was resilient to it. And this is an example of the wheat grown with the chemical fertilizers. It now needed to be sprayed with toxic chemical fungicides. And otherwise, they would have got no yield. It gave them a yield of 1.6 tons per hectare. That's equivalent to 1,600 pounds of wheat per acre. Next slide, please. This is the wheat grown with compost. It resisted the rust. It gave 6.5 tons per hectare, which is 6,500 pounds per acre. The really important thing is the fertilizer costs the farmers money. They had to borrow money for it, go into debt. Compost is an opportunity cost. It's made on farm, either nothing or at very little cost. This is another example of systems that we can do where we bring in agroecology, where we bring in functional biodiversity to give us effective weed control or weed management and pest control. In this case, they bring in a legume called silverleaf desmodium. Instead of spraying it out with herbicides and killing everything, we bring in this functional biodiversity into the system. And in this case, they increase the yields by 100%, but up to 10 times the yield with these systems. And this is a way of growing rice called system of rice intensification. You can see the standard paddy rice, which is a small thin one, and the rice that occurs that you can grow when you use the system of rice intensification. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out which of those two rice plants will give you the highest yield. Consequently, organic SRI yields on averages around 7 tons of rice per hectare. That's 7,000 pounds per acre, compared to the industrial average of 3 tons. And this is, talking about Sri Lanka. If we had brought in the system of rice intensification there, we could have doubled yields. I've been talking about the global south, but now I want to move to North America, to Pennsylvania. And the Rodale Institute has just published its review of its 40-year farming systems trial. And I recommend that everybody go to Rodale and download it, because what it clearly shows is that regenerative organic fields had higher yields than GMO and herbicide no-till fields. Next slide, please. And this is an example in a drought. And you can see here that because the organic field has built up the amount of organic matter, it's better at capturing water and keeping it. So it yields higher in droughts. This is a scientific review of the Rodale trial, and it showed that on average, the corn yields and drought yields were 28 to 34% higher in the organic systems over the industrial agricultural systems. So I want to end on this. This is a really good book written by Dr. Vandana Shiva. And what she shows here is that she looked at fields, the total nutrition from fields, not just measuring yield per acre, but looking at, all the minerals and vitamins that you can get. And what she found is that highly diverse smallholder regenerative organic agriculture produces more nutrients, vital nutrients per acre than industrial monocultures. And she showed very clearly that converting India's agriculture to these highly diverse regenerative or organic agriculture systems, you would be able to feed 2 times India's population. So I want to end on this and to say that local regenerative organic systems nourish the world, because the majority of farmers are smallholders on 5 acres or less. They produce 80% of the food of the global south. And if we train them in regenerative organic agriculture based on the science of agroecology, we can dramatically increase yields. On the other hand, 75 years of industrial agriculture with toxic synthetic pesticides, fertilizers, and GMOs supplying distant commodity markets have failed. The amount of hungry people, malnourished people, is increasing all the time. So we need to refocus on regenerative organic agriculture. And this is the evidence-based way to end food security and nourish the world. So thank you.